This video is brought to you by catbeast.com. Design your own custom snapbacks and hats.
Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we're talking about another CNN anchor embarrassing themselves in public once again. Before we get into that though, special thanks again to Catbeast for sponsoring today's video. They're an excellent company with wonderful custom hats to choose from, with great colors and designs. So support the show and check out Catbeast today, link below. Now back to the CNN anchor having a meltdown story. This time it's Chris Cuomo who's breaking down and sparking a bit of a controversy this week. This liberal shill and political hack recently got caught having a little meltdown in public at a restaurant. What happened was, basically, someone off the street came up and called Chris Fredo, an insulting reference to the famous Godfather book and film series. We'll get more into the specifics of that soon too, but first, to sum up the incident completely, someone called Cuomo Fredo at a restaurant a few nights ago, and this prompted Chris to get up and start yelling in that guy's face, cursing like a sailor all along the way too. Chris Cuomo was acting like a triggered and unprofessional asshole, clearly, and unfortunately for him, this whole altercation was caught on video and then promptly uploaded and spread around the internet. I unfortunately can't show you the original video here since, in light of the growing popularity of this and it making a left-wing host look really bad, well, what's happened is liberal-led tech companies began banning this video shortly after it caught steam and got viral. So while we can't show the actual video here on YouTube, I'm sure you can look and find it yourselves by searching other websites all over the place. And there's really not much more to it that happened than what I already explained, but let me go ahead and try and expand on it anyway, and then we'll move on to where the story goes shortly. Back to describing that video first though. Well, besides what's already been said, Chris was at dinner, he got called Fredo and then started freaking out. Well, besides that, there were a couple of other points worth noting. First of all, to give Chris Cuomo some credit, he was at dinner, not at work, and he was also allegedly eating with his family or friends too. So some people did try and commend the guy a bit for stepping up here and not just taking that insult in front of everyone like a coward. And clearly Cuomo thought he was being a badass doing this thing too, constantly dropping F-bombs like he was an actual gangster, ironically enough. Cuomo even puffed up so much at one moment, he was asking the other guy to hit him. Chris clearly wanted the insulter to hit him first so he could then attack him in self-defense. Shouldn't be surprised that left-wingers are trying to get violent in this day and age, I guess, but it's still wrong and cringy to watch. And as far as the other guy in the video is concerned, the one who called him Fredo really didn't do much besides that. I guess he yelled Fredo at Chris before the viral video started rolling because on camera, the insulter stayed pretty calm otherwise, even saying plainly that he actually thought Chris's name was Fredo. And sure, perhaps he was lying and trying to back out a little bit there, but still, the point is the other guy really didn't do that much. He called him Fredo and that's about it. Then Cuomo, on the other hand, really blew up and tried to beat him up and all kinds of stuff, cursing and much more. This brings us to the final point of the meltdown video. Finally, after a bit of yelling, Chris Cuomo then begins to say that Fredo is not only insulting to him, but it's also an ethnic slur against him for being Italian. Pretty big stretch right there to say the least, but just like with the suggestion of violence being made, I guess we shouldn't be surprised when liberals also call you offensive or racist these days either. And before we move on, calling Chris Fredo is far less damning and offensive than the slurs and insults he and his network CNN sling around all the time. Chris Cuomo calls innocent people racist, Nazis, and white supremacists on television, in the public, pretty much every single day he's on the air. Then later, now, with this story, Chris gets one mild jab in private and he then gets violently hysterical and wildly offended. A slightly better man would realize the error of his ways here. They would also recognize that their own name calling invites others to name call you yourself. And also, the baseless name calling happening at CNN is harmful, and this kind of reaction is a byproduct of that. You can't go around calling everyone racist on TV every day and then also expect to never be name called yourself. Then also, to make this situation even worse, while Chris Cuomo and CNN's racist claims and Nazi name calling is almost never supported by facts, logic, or reason, well, calling Chris Fredo actually is. It's actually a rather accurate and damning condemnation of him. And perhaps, I think, that's why it triggered him so hard. In fact, Chris Cuomo was so upset, as I mentioned before, he not only claimed Fredo was an ethnic slur against Italians, he also said it was like calling him the N-word if he was black. Pretty ridiculous and over the top, clearly. and this also goes counter to Cuomo's previous views on the term Fredo throughout his public history. We'll get more into Chris's history with the term Fredo too, but first, let's talk about what that term even means in the first place. Where does Fredo come from, and why is it such an accurate characterization of Chris, which of course is also why it pissed him off so much. As I mentioned briefly earlier, Fredo is a famous character from the Godfather series. Now, I know most people my age and older are big fans of this, but apparently millennials and younger haven't really heard of it, so let's go ahead and do a brief recap. The Godfather is a famous mafia crime film from 1972, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Widely regarded as one of the greatest films of all time, this mob drama, based on Mario Puzo's novel of the same name, focuses on the powerful Italian-American family of Don Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando. When the Don's youngest son, Michael, played by Al Pacino, reluctantly joins the mafia, he becomes involved in the inevitable cycle of violence and betrayal. Although Michael tries to maintain a normal relationship with his wife Kay, he is drawn deeper into the family business regardless. Fredo comes into the picture later too, as Fredo is Michael's knucklehead brother. Fredo's also the black sheep of the family, if you will, being much weaker and less intelligent than his brothers and father. With that said, Fredo has little power or status within his much respected Corleone crime-filled family, and Fredo's primary weakness is his womanizing, a habit he develops after moving to Las Vegas, and which earns his father's disfavor in the process. In the films, Fredo's feelings of personal inadequacy and his inability to act effectively on his own behalf are character flaws leading to greater consequences. And not to spoil too much of the movies here either, but shit, the originals came out over 40 years ago, guys, so screw it. Fredo also ends up betraying the whole family, which forces the new boss Michael to have to take him out. So basically, yeah, Fredo was the shitty brother character who embarrassed his family in the Godfather films and books, and he had to be taken care of because of it. And ever since this movie series and books became world famous and some of the best movies of all time, well, people have been quoting and referencing it for ages too. And one of the biggest references from this series is Fredo. People essentially like calling others Fredo as a way to insult them for being dumb, or more specifically, the dumber, less important brother in a bigger, high-profile family like the Corleone mafia crime family in the books and movies. And believe it or not, this Fredo insult actually relates back to Chris Cuomo in more ways than you'd actually think. Not only is Chris a simple buffoonish Italian from New York City like Fredo in the movie, but also Chris is the less successful, less intelligent member of his own family. And Chris ended up working in entertainment just like Fredo. While Fredo went to Las Vegas when he realized he couldn't cut it in crime, well, Chris went into news reporting at CNN instead of becoming a powerful politician like much of the rest of his family. You see, not only is Chris's older brother the governor of New York right now, but also their father was governor there previously too. And needless to say, Chris may think he's some kind of big hotshot reporter on CNN each night, but that position pales in comparison to being the frickin' governor of New York, one of the biggest and most influential states in the United States. It's also worth noting that not only are CNN's ratings the worst of all cable news, but also Chris's show is struggling to get viewers specifically. So yeah, I think we can all see the Fredo comparison is particularly accurate and devastating to Mr. Cuomo. And it's also not racially charged at all. Aside from being an Italian name from a fictional Italian-American family, there's really no racial element to this in the slightest. And to make matters even worse for Chris C., he's also been caught hearing and using the term Fredo himself in his public history. And these other times he reacted much differently, to say the least. For our first example here, here's a video of him hearing one of his guests on his own show call someone else Fredo. Take a look at this one.
Who is somehow trying to hang on to the fame of his father in order to have some level of relevancy. Steve was right. He didn't even make the cut that his brother-in-law and sister did to be part of the Oval Office and the White House staff. Daddy kept Fredo back home. So who cares what Donald Trump Jr. says? Who cares what Donald Trump Jr. says?
Well, I care what he has to say, and many people do. In fact, many more people care what Trump Jr. has to say than you, lady. You're Ana Navarro, a fake Republican collecting paychecks from CNN of all places. You're a hack. And Chris Cuomo here, while he does have his usual surprised deer in headlights look on his face, but he certainly doesn't look or act like he just heard a really awful, dramatically bad and racist slur, even though Ana Navarro here just called Trump Jr. Fredo, a term which he said was a slur just in this new viral video. So I guess maybe that term term's only offensive and racist if it's directed at Chris personally then, because if he really thought that term was so bad and anti-Italian, you'd think he would have spoken up here when a regular guest on his show used it in front of him. Next, things get even weirder when it came out that in an older interview, Chris Cuomo actually called himself Fredo. An article from the New York Post has more details. Here's an audio clip from there where Chris calls himself Fredo in a pretty nonchalant, non-offended way too. Check this out.
That there is a group of people, of politicos, who always hint that they might run but don't necessarily plunge all the way, and they are members of La Cuomo Nostra.
So who am I then, Fredo?
Yes, exactly. So you better be careful that your brother Andrew doesn't kiss you on both cheeks, and then all of a sudden they take you out into the middle of the lake, and then, where's Chris?
There you can hear Chris laughing while calling himself Fredo now. What a hypocrite. Clearly Chris didn't believe Fredo was this big bad racial slur before. Or maybe he was just having a bad night this week when it triggered him. Could have been on his period or something, who knows. But when you do put this all together, you can really see how ridiculous and shitty this guy is making him and CNN look. Finally, let's wrap things up by reading a couple of priceless tweets and reactions to the Cuomo story on Twitter. First, Donald Trump Jr. himself responds to that first video we saw where Ana Navarro called him Fredo. Here, in this tweet, Trump Jr. says, does CNN's head of PR still think Fredo is an ethnic slur after watching this? Because if it's the N-word for Italians like what Chris Cuomo says, I don't understand why Chris seems so at ease with someone saying it here. An excuse just as fake as his news. Hashtag Fredo Cuomo. Well put, Mr. T. And it's also worth noting that CNN has been nothing but supportive of Chris Cuomo in light of this big meltdown and breaking down moment where he again cursed like a sailor, called someone else racist for no reason, and even threatened to throw the guy down the stairs. But regardless of all that embarrassment, CNN is still standing by Chris, even going along with his ridiculous Fredo is racist claims. Lastly, the president himself, Donald Trump Sr., decided to chime in too, saying this: would Chris Cuomo be given a red flag for his recent rant, filthy language, and a total loss of control? He shouldn't be allowed to have any weapon, he's nuts. Another good point, Mr. President, and this also perfectly encapsulates why so-called red flag laws won't work, or how they can be abused, and they'll also infringe upon our Second Amendment rights as well. In the end, CNN and specifically Chris Cuomo, they really embarrassed themselves again with this bullshit. Not only were they triggered, overreacting, and wrong, but they also did the classic liberal double down, over trying to actually apologize and do the right thing. What do you guys think? Is Chris Cuomo breaking down? Is calling him Fredo a racist slur? And should he have blown up at that heckler like he did, or would it have been better for him to just let it go? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.